Joining me now is North Dakota Senator Kevin Cramer. He's member of the Environment and Public Works Committee. Senator, great to see you. Thank you for being here. That 1.2 million barrel per day deficit that we're still at right now, despite the fact, I mean, it's good news that we had 16 more rigs open up, but it doesn't affect the overall picture. That 1.2 million barrels per day is more than double what we were getting from Russia. I mean, there are national security implications to not producing enough oil, aren't there?
There are, and there always have been, David. And thank you for the opportunity to be with you. I've been saying for 20 years that energy security is national security. And we used to say that because we used to think about the incredible amount of money that the United States spends defending, the Straits of Hormuz, for example, and the movement of Middle Eastern oil to the United States. Well, now, when you look at it in the context of Ukraine and Russia, you look at places like Venezuela and Saudi Arabia or Iran, who's a major oil producer, the United States can not only produce more than enough for the United States, we can produce plenty for many other parts of the world, especially where our allies live, so that they're less dependent on our adversaries. Yeah. And quite frankly, why we don't use more of the peaceful tools of energy development rather than the weapons of war to keep our enemies at bay is beyond me.
Well, that's a great point.
Well, what's happened is that the Democratic Party, which is yielding to people like AOC and Prime Minister Bernie Sanders and their extreme agenda, they want to transfer their climate guilt to the big polluting countries, as though somehow they're doing something for climate change by turning out the spigots in the United States. It makes zero sense.
Senator, there may be a country, maybe Norway or a country in Europe that produces oil, that produces it cleaner than the United States. But not all these people that the Biden administration is turning to. Nobody's dirtier than Venezuela. I know Venezuelan oil company very well. They're filthy. The way they produce oil, the kind of oil they produce, the way it's refined, et cetera. So if you want to clean the environment, you drill more here. It's that simple. But it's the connection between price and supply that I was referring to with regard to national security, because Putin just couldn't fund his war machine as easily as he's doing if the price hadn't jumped up because of the lack of supply.
That's exactly right. For the petrostates, for whom energy and particularly oil and gas production is the largest part of their economy, this is a really big deal to them. And we could choke them off by what I advocate for, David, is an America First energy policy where we actually work with our allies in places like Europe, for example, who have now created a standard, a carbon border adjustment, as you know, that they're using for trade purposes. If we adopted with them a standard that we and they already meet, but Vladimir Putin will never meet. And by the way, how about we consider a labor standard as well, where we don't have the human rights violations, we have high labor standards. And I'm not talking about adding cost, I'm not talking about adding regulations, I'm talking about just doing what we're doing with our trading partners in a way that will not only will it shut off the money supply for Vladimir Putin's war machine, but it also forces all of the players to increase their own standards as well. Yeah. That'd be a far, far better approach than just trying to choke off the supply in the United States with the hope, I guess, that you'll choke off the demand, which is not the case.
We've been talking a lot about oil, and that's usually where people go to first. But there's natural gas is even a more important issue. Of course, it is to folks in North Dakota and other states that do a lot of fracking. But you think of what's happening, all of the extra regulations that have been laid on natural gas, which are causing a reduction of production of natural gas, have led to us using more coal. We used to get, in 2020, we got 20% of our energy needs from coal. Now we're getting 24%. So the air is getting dirtier because we're cutting back on natural gas. Again, it goes directly counter to their claims for environmentalism.
Well, there's a lot of hypocrisy in Democrats' energy and environmental policies. And like I said earlier, they're really just transferring their guilt to other places, and makes no sense. This is why you need a truly all-the-above energy strategy that's really an environmental strategy as well. Because to the natural gas point, just as one example, Vladimir Putin's natural gas that he produces and then ships via pipeline to Europe, or used to, is 41% greater greenhouse gas emissions that it emits than natural gas produced in the United States of America and shipped. When you consider the entire life cycle of the product, and while you talk about other places that produce pretty clean fossil fuels, and there are places that do, but when you consider the entire life cycle and all of the other standards that surround it, it's a really big deal. So you're exactly right. Remember when natural gas was called the bridge fuel, and Hillary Clinton famously said it's a bridge we need to cross really quickly.
Yep.
It's that kind of a tone that sends chills up investors' spines, because how do you respond to a cry like that says, okay, we'd like you to invest in your energy, but we want it to only be short term. Investment needs to be repaid over the long term.
Well, another example of the lack of knowledge with regard to how stuff is created and sold is their tax on the pipelines. And then when that's brought up, I mean, it was the first thing that Biden did was close down the XL pipeline. They say, Jen Psaki and others say, well, but, a pipeline isn't oil or it isn't natural gas. Well, you don't produce oil or natural gas unless you're sure you can ship it out of there, right?
That's exactly right. And by the way, the cleanest way to ship oil and gas is in a pipeline.
Right.
I mean,
well, now, by the way, now they're talking about getting Canadian, the oil and gas that was going to go through XL, they're talking about shipping it down because they can't use a pipeline. That's much more dangerous and ecologically dangerous than using a pipeline, right?
It is both of those things, as well as it emits about double the greenhouse gas emissions that a pipeline emits. So the whole thing is absurd on its face, or at least absurd when you scrape a little bit of the surface off. But they don't want you to do that, David. That's the problem. They swim in the shallow end of the pool when it comes to economic policy. And the American people are not fooled by it, because when they go to fill their car with gas or they look at their light bill, they know it's going up, and it's going up way too much.
Well, we've got Kevin Hassard coming on a little later. Kevin is going to be talking about the so-called Putin price hike, which is actually started long before Putin had eyes on Ukraine, or at least was massing the army there. Senator, we've got to leave it at that. Thank you so much for coming in. Appreciate it. Good to see you.
Always my pleasure. Good to see you, David.
Thank you.